I never told my mother-in-law what I actually did in the army. She smirked as I walked into court, holding my daughter's hand, whispering that I did not stand a chance against her money. She kept that smug smile right up until the judge stood, adjusted his robes, and said, "Good morning, Colonel." The blood drained from her face so fast you would think she had seen a ghost. "You are a colonel," she gasped. "But let me back up. My name is Tara, 34 years old, and I just buried the love of my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from toxic family members who thought their money made them untouchable." The rain beat relentlessly against the stained glass windows of the country club. Liam had hated this place. He always said the air felt heavy with fake money and insincere handshakes. Yet here we were hosting his funeral reception in the exact room he actively avoided during his life. I stood near the heavy oak doors, dressed in a simple black dress, holding my 6-year-old daughter Lily tightly against my side. She was exhausted, confused, and clutching a single white rose she had taken from the beautiful floral arrangement near her father's casket. I was running on zero sleep and pure adrenaline, trying to shield her from the overwhelming crowd of strangers. Across the lavish room, my mother-in-law Beatrice was putting on the performance of a lifetime. At 62 years old, Beatrice treated her only son's tragic passing like a high society networking event. She was draped in a custom black designer suit, her hair perfectly styled, holding a crystal glass of expensive wine. She glided from group to group, accepting condolences from wealthy executives with practiced, tearless sighs. She never once looked over to see how her granddaughter was doing. She never once asked if I needed a glass of water or a moment to sit down. I kept my distance, hoping to just survive the afternoon so I could take Lily home and finally let ourselves cry in peace. But Beatrice had other plans. I watched as her eyes locked onto me from across the room. Her fake, sorrowful expression vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated glare. The sharp clacking of her expensive heels echoed across the hardwood floor as she marched directly toward us, cutting through the crowd of mourners like a shark. Before I could even brace myself or offer a polite greeting, Beatrice reached out and snatched the white rose right out of Lily's small hands. She crumpled the petals and tossed it onto a nearby tray of empty champagne glasses like it was garbage. Lily whimpered, burying her face into my shoulder and wrapping her little arms around my neck. I stepped forward, my voice low and dangerous, warning her to step away from my child. Instead of retreating, Beatrice shoved a thick, heavy manila envelope hard against my chest. I caught it before it could fall to the floor. I looked down at the legal seal on the front and asked her what game she was playing at her own son's funeral. Beatrice leaned in uncomfortably close. Her breath smelled of expensive gin and bitter mints. "It is an eviction notice," she hissed, keeping her voice just low enough so her wealthy friends could not hear her venom. "You have exactly 7 days to pack up your cheap clothes and get out of my son's house. And the second document in there is an emergency custody filing. I am taking Lily." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if grief had finally driven her completely insane. I asked her on what possible grounds she thought she could take my child away from me. Beatrice let out a harsh, grating laugh that made several people nearby turn their heads. "On the grounds that you are a low-class warehouse worker with absolutely no future and no pedigree," she sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You dispatch logistics trucks for a living, Tara. You move cardboard boxes. My granddaughter carries our family bloodline. She deserves elite private schools, luxury vacations, and a proper high-society upbringing. She does not deserve a life scraping by on a pathetic warehouse dispatcher salary." We all knew Liam made a massive mistake marrying a penniless orphan with zero connections, but I will not let you drag his only child down into the gutter with you. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw a fit. Years of intense military discipline kept my heart rate steady and my face completely blank. I slowly opened the envelope, pulling out the ridiculous legal threats she had drawn up. I scanned the papers, then looked Beatrice dead in the eye. "You want to talk about Liam's house," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and calm. "You must be experiencing some severe memory loss, Beatrice. My name is the only one on that deed. That warehouse salary you find so repulsive has paid the mortgage, the property taxes, and every single utility bill for the last 7 years. Liam's so-called wealthy family has never contributed a single dime to our life together. In fact, Liam had to cut financial ties with your pristine bloodline 3 years ago because you kept begging him for loans to fund your country club memberships and shopping habits. Beatrice's face flushed a deep mottled red. Her carefully maintained socialite mask completely slipped, revealing the desperate, vicious woman underneath. She snapped her fingers, and a man in a sharp gray suit materialized from the crowd behind her. This was her high-priced lawyer, a man who looked like he billed by the second. He offered a slick, entirely fake smile as he stepped between us. Actually, the lawyer said smoothly, adjusting his expensive watch as of an hour ago, we filed an emergency injunction and successfully froze all of your joint bank accounts, pending a full probate investigation. Your assets are completely inaccessible. Beatrice stepped closer, invading my personal space, until I could see the broken blood vessels on her cheeks. She smiled a terrifying, predatory grin that made my blood run cold. Let us see how long you can keep my granddaughter, when you cannot even afford to buy her dinner tonight, she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. Enjoy your last few days with her, Tara. By Friday you will be homeless, broke, and entirely alone. I looked from the frozen joint accounts document in the lawyer's hand straight into Beatrice's triumphant eyes. She was waiting for the breakdown. She was waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate realization that I had nothing. Instead, I shifted my grip on Lily, ensuring my daughter was comfortable against my hip, and reached into my black leather purse. I bypassed the civilian bank cards and pulled out a heavy piece of matte black titanium. It had no bank logo, no standard customer service numbers, and certainly no ties to Liam's estate. It was a restricted, highly encrypted account issued through the Department of Defense for senior officers managing high-clearance cyber operations. The catering director for the country club was hovering nervously a few feet away, holding a leather folio containing the invoice for the afternoon's extravagant spread. Beatrice had ordered imported caviar reserve champagne and a string quartet, fully intending to stick me with the tab right after springing her legal trap. I waved the catering director over. I believe you have an outstanding balance, I said evenly. The director opened the folio, his eyes darting between me and Beatrice. Yes, ma'am. The total for the reception is $40,000. Beatrice's lawyer smirked, crossing his arms. He actually leaned forward, eager to watch my card decline. I dropped the heavy titanium metal onto the folio. Run it, I instructed. The catering director pulled a portable terminal from his apron, inserted the card, and handed it to me for a signature. The machine beeped instantly. Approved. No holds, no limits. I handed the terminal back and looked at the lawyer, whose smug expression had just shattered into utter confusion. You should verify your intel before launching an offensive, I told him calmly. I turned to my mother-in-law. My warehouse job pays surprisingly well, Beatrice. I can certainly afford to cover your ostentatious display of fake grief. Now, if you will excuse me, my daughter needs to go home. Beatrice went rigidly pale. Her country club friends, who had been lingering nearby to watch the drama, were now openly whispering behind their manicured hands. I had just outspent the wealthiest woman in their circle without blinking. Furious and humiliated in her own territory, Beatrice snatched her phone from her designer handbag. I could hear her furiously dialing as I walked away, demanding to speak to a state senator she kept on retainer. She was going to make good on her threat. She was going to get me fired. The alarm buzzed at exactly 4 the next morning. I did not hit snooze. I ran 3 miles in the dark, showered, and prepared a perfect bento box lunch for Lily. I dropped her off at her private kindergarten, kissing her forehead and promising I would be there for pickup. Then I drove to the industrial district on the outskirts of the city. From the street, the building looked exactly like what I told my in-laws. It was a massive, boring logistics and shipping warehouse. The sign out front read Apex Freight Solutions. But once I bypassed the biometric scanner's retinal checks and dual steel reinforced security doors, the warehouse transformed into a sprawling state-of-the-art server farm and tactical operations center for the United States Army Cyber Command. I walked into the glass-enclosed briefing room overlooking the floor. Director Reynolds, A Pentagon liaison posing as the regional civilian branch manager was already waiting at the conference table. He stood at attention the second I walked in. "Good morning, Colonel," he said, handing me a freshly printed dossier. "We intercepted an interesting communication this morning. It seems a local civilian named Beatrice made a substantial donation to a political action committee, followed by a direct call to our front company's human resources line. She offered a $50,000 bribe to have you terminated immediately for gross misconduct." I poured myself a cup of black coffee, barely suppressing a smile. Beatrice was incredibly predictable. She thought she was dealing with a defenseless widow working a minimum-wage dispatch job. She had absolutely no idea she was attempting to bribe a federal intelligence front to fire an active-duty commanding officer. "What are your orders?" Colonel Reynolds asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Should we dispatch a federal agent to her residence for attempted bribery of a government official?" I shook my head, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. Negative. In cyber warfare, when an enemy launches a poorly planned attack, you let them think they breached your firewall. It makes them sloppy. Accept the bribe, Reynolds. Route the $50,000 directly into the Injured Veterans Charity Fund. Then draft an official-looking termination letter on Apex Freight letterhead and email it directly to her. Reynolds grinned, immediately understanding the tactic. "You want her to believe she won." "I want her to overextend her supply lines," I corrected him. "Once she thinks I am completely destitute and unemployed, she will make a fatal mistake." Reynolds executed the orders perfectly. By 10 o'clock that morning, Beatrice received a formal email confirming my immediate termination from the logistics company. I sat at my desk, monitoring the secure data feeds, waiting for her next move. Liam had always shielded me from his family's toxic narcissism, unaware that my military training made me the apex predator in any room. Now that he was gone, the gloves were off. It did not take long. My secure cell phone vibrated sharply against the desk. It was an emergency alert from the principal's office at Lily's school. My mother-in-law had not even waited a full hour after receiving the fake termination notice. Armed with the belief that I was now a broke unemployed and evicted widow, Beatrice had marched straight past the school's front desk. The principal's frantic message confirmed my tactical prediction. Beatrice was currently standing in the school lobby, demanding to unenroll Lily and physically remove her from the premises, loudly claiming the child's mother was a destitute failure who could no longer afford the tuition. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, my tires squealing against the wet asphalt as I tore out of the secure parking lot. My military training had taught me to compartmentalize fear, to view every threat as a tactical puzzle to be dismantled. But when it came to my daughter, the icy calm of a commanding officer warred with the primal, terrifying rage of a mother protecting her only child. Beatrice had overplayed her hand. She thought I was sitting at home weeping over a fake termination letter and packing my bags. Instead, she had just committed a massive strategic error by attacking my most heavily guarded asset. I pulled up to the manicured circular driveway of Lily's elite private academy in record time. I abandoned my car in the fire lane, ignoring the honking of a delivery truck, and sprinted up the brick steps. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the administration building, bracing myself for a screaming match. I was fully prepared to physically remove my mother-in-law from the premises if necessary. But the scene in the reception area stopped me dead in my tracks. I did not hear Beatrice yelling at the principal. I did not hear Lily crying. Instead, I heard the crisp, authoritative voice of a woman completely dismantling Beatrice's entire existence. "You cannot simply march into an educational institution with an unnotarized, legally baseless document and demand a child Beatrice. It is amateur hour, and frankly, it is embarrassing to watch." Standing between the principal's office and a sputtering, furious Beatrice was Simone. Simone was married to Liam's younger brother, Connor. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense forensic accountant who ran her own highly successful firm. She was also the only African-American woman in this insufferable old money family, a fact that Beatrice had always treated with thinly veiled hostility. Right now, Simone looked like an absolute powerhouse. She was wearing a flawless navy blue power suit, her arms crossed, standing like an impenetrable wall of logic and legal reality between Beatrice and the school's administration. "I have a court filing right here," Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing off the lobby's high ceiling. Her hands shook as she waved the same manila envelope she had shoved into my chest yesterday. "Tara is unemployed. She is being evicted. I am taking custody of my granddaughter before that woman drags her into a homeless shelter." Simone let out a short, sharp laugh that cut through the lobby like a scalpel. "That is not a court order, Beatrice. That is a piece of paper your overpriced, morally bankrupt lawyer drafted to scare a grieving widow. It has no judicial backing." Simone stepped closer, her height and presence forcing Beatrice to take a physical step back. "And I suggest you lower your voice. You are making a fool of yourself in front of the entire PTA board." Beatrice's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She looked Simone up and down with that familiar elitist sneer. "You have no right to interfere in family business." "Simone," Beatrice hissed, her tone dropping into the ugly, racist microaggressions she usually saved for closed doors. "You have always been far too arrogant for your own good. You people always think you can just force your way into circles where you do not belong. Connor never should have brought you into this family." Simone did not even blink. She just smiled, a terrifying, razor-sharp expression that made me instantly proud to call her my sister-in-law. "You have hated me since the day Connor brought me home," Beatrice Simone said, her voice echoing with crystal-clear precision. "A brilliant black woman with a CPA who actually knows how to read a balance sheet absolutely terrifies you. You hate the fact that I saw through your leased luxury cars and your heavily mortgaged pearls on day one. I know exactly what you are, Beatrice. You are a fraud, and you are not getting anywhere near Tara or Lily." I stepped out from the hallway, letting the heavy doors shut loudly behind me. Both women turned. Beatrice's eyes widened in absolute shock. She looked at her watch, then back at me, her mind clearly short-circuiting. She had expected me to be locked in my house, paralyzed by the loss of my warehouse job and my frozen bank accounts. She never expected me to walk into the school lobby looking completely unfazed. Tara Beatrice stammered, clutching her designer bag. "What are you doing here? You should be packing." "I am here to pick up my daughter," I said smoothly, walking past her to stand shoulder to shoulder with Simone. "And to make sure the school's security team has a recent photograph of you, Beatrice, so they know exactly who to arrest for trespassing the next time you show your face here." The school principal, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes from his doorway, quickly nodded. "Mrs. Preston, I assure you Lily is safely in her classroom. We will not release her to anyone but you." Beatrice looked between me and Simone. She was outnumbered, outsmarted, and publicly humiliated. Her chest heaved with suppressed rage as she pointed a manicured finger at me. "This is not over, Tara." She spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you can keep her from me? You have no money. You have no job. By the end of the week, the courts will hand her over to me, and you will never see her again." She spun on her heel and stormed out of the building, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind her. I let out a slow, controlled breath, feeling the immediate threat neutralize. I turned to Simone, genuinely moved by her fierce intervention. Liam had always loved Simone. He respected her mind and her refusal to back down from his mother's toxicity. But because of the family dynamics, Simone and I had rarely spent time alone together. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You did not have to step in front of that bullet for me." Simone adjusted her briefcase on her shoulder, her expression softening as she looked at me. "Liam was the only decent man in that entire bloodline, Tara. He treated me like a real sister. I am not going to let that vile woman destroy the family he built." We walked out of the building together, the crisp morning air a welcome relief from the tension of the lobby. I assumed Simone had just been dropping off her own kids, but as we reached the parking lot, she stopped between our cars and looked around carefully, ensuring no one was listening. Her corporate armor seemed to drop for a second, revealing a deeply concerned ally. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. She held it out to me. I took the drive, the cool metal heavy in my palm. "What is this?" I asked. Simone looked me dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a serious, urgent whisper. Beatrice is not trying to take Lily because she loves her Tara. She is not doing this out of some twisted sense of family pride. I frowned, looking down at the drive. Then why is she risking a massive legal battle? Because she is desperate, Simone said flatly. I audited the family business last month when Connor asked me to look into some missing dividends. The company is completely hollowed out. Beatrice has been secretly funneling money into offshore accounts and terrible investments for decades. She is $15 million in debt, Tara. The banks are getting ready to seize her house, the country club memberships, everything. I processed the intelligence, my military mind instantly connecting the dots. But how does taking Lily fix a $15 million deficit? Simone took a deep breath, because Liam knew his mother was corrupt. 3 months before he died, he secretly liquidated his personal stock options and set up a $10 million ironclad trust fund for Lily. Beatrice found out about it yesterday. If she gets emergency custody of your daughter, she gains legal control of that trust as her guardian. She needs Lily so she can raid that $10 million to save herself from federal bankruptcy. I gripped the encrypted flash drive Simone had pressed into my hand, the cool metal anchoring me to reality. As I drove back to the house Beatrice was actively plotting to steal. $10 million. Liam had known his mother was a financial predator, and he had quietly moved a mountain of wealth to protect our little girl. The sheer desperation of a $15 million deficit meant Beatrice was a cornered animal, fighting for her social and financial survival. And cornered animals were dangerous. But I was not an animal. I was a tactician. The moment I walked through my front door, I engaged my contingency protocols. I greeted Lily with a warm hug, helped her finish her kindergarten art project, and tucked her into bed with a story about a brave knight guarding an impenetrable fortress. Once her steady breathing filled the room, my living room transformed from a cozy suburban sanctuary into a remote command center. I plugged Simone's drive into my encrypted laptop and spent hours mapping Beatrice's disastrous financial footprint, tracking every bad investment and offshore transfer. But I knew money was only half the battlefield. Beatrice needed a manufactured crisis to fast-track her emergency custody filing. A judge would not just hand over a child because a grandmother asked nicely. Beatrice had to prove I was a threat. I routed all the exterior and interior security cameras through an independent military-grade server and set digital tripwires across my local network. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, left it on the warming plate, and changed out of my casual clothes into perfectly pressed slacks and a crisp button-down shirt. I did not go to sleep. I sat in the dark living room sipping water and waited for the enemy to make their move. The assault came exactly at 2 a.m. Heavy, aggressive pounding echoed through the quiet house, accompanied by the harsh, strobing glare of red and blue police lights sweeping across my living room walls. The doorbell rang incessantly, a shrill sound meant to induce panic. I did not flinch. My heart rate remained at a steady resting pace. I calmly picked up my tablet and accessed the perimeter feeds. 2 police cruisers and a plain white county sedan were parked diagonally across my driveway, aggressively blocking my car. 4 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts, flanking 2 grim-looking civilians holding clipboards. Child Protective Services. I switched the camera view to the street. There, standing safely across the asphalt on the public sidewalk, was Beatrice. She was bundled in a designer cashmere coat, holding her smartphone up with both hands, recording my front door. She was waiting for the show. She wanted me to rip open the door, screaming, half asleep, disheveled, confused, and unhinged. She needed the police body cameras to capture a hysterical, violent woman resisting authority. She needed the visual proof that I was an unfit mother losing her mind. I took a slow, measured breath. I walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled it open with a smooth, silent motion. "Good morning, officers," I said, my voice projecting calm, unwavering authority. "How can I assist you tonight?" The lead officer blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my composed demeanor and professional attire. He lowered his hand from his belt, and exchanged a confused glance with the lead CPS investigator, a stern woman with a tight bun and a skeptical frown. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous emergency tip claiming a child was in immediate physical danger at this residence." The investigator stated, her eyes darting past me, trying to peer into the shadows of the house. "We need to enter the premises immediately and perform a welfare check on Lily Preston." I stepped aside without a second of hesitation, gesturing toward the spotless, brightly lit living room. "Please come in. Keep your voices down so we do not wake her. I have fresh coffee in the kitchen if anyone needs a cup. It is a cold night to be out on a call." The tactical shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The officers who had been expecting a barricade situation or a screaming match visibly relaxed their shoulders. The CPS workers walked into a home that smelled of fresh laundry and roasted coffee, completely devoid of the chaos they had been primed to find. I did not wait for their interrogations. I walked over to the dining table and picked up a thick color-coded binder I had prepared hours ago. "This contains Lily's complete pediatric records, vaccination history, dental charts, and letters of recommendation from her teachers," I said, handing the heavy binder directly to the lead investigator. I then picked up my tablet and handed it to the second worker. "That is the live feed and the archived 24-hour security footage of every room in this house, fully encrypted and time-stamped. You can review the last 30 days of activity right now. You will see homework sessions, family dinners, and bedtime stories. You will not see a single moment of neglect." The lead investigator scrolled through the meticulous medical records while her partner reviewed the crystal-clear security footage. The aggressive, suspicious tension completely drained from their faces, replaced by a look of profound professional respect. The lead investigator looked out my front window, spotting Beatrice still standing on the sidewalk with her phone held high, recording absolutely nothing of value. The investigator closed the binder and handed it back to me. She signaled the police officers to stand down. They quietly exited the house, apologizing for the late hour, leaving just the investigator at the door. She leaned in close, checking to make sure the officers were out of earshot, keeping her voice to a bare whisper. "Someone is playing a very dangerous game with you, Mrs. Preston." The anonymous tipster did not just call the police. They also submitted a sworn medical file to the court late this evening. It claims you have been diagnosed with severe violent schizophrenia and have stopped taking your medication. You have an emergency custody hearing in 48 hours, and if you do not prove that file is fake, you will lose your daughter. I locked the deadbolt as the Child Protective Services investigator walked away, leaving me standing in the silence of my entryway. 48 hours. That was all the time I had before I stood in front of a family court judge to defend my sanity. Beatrice had submitted a sworn medical file claiming I suffered from severe violent schizophrenia. It was a brilliant, completely evil tactical maneuver. In family court, a severe mental health allegation forces a judge to err on the side of caution. Even if the claim was eventually proven false, the judge would likely grant temporary emergency custody to the grandmother just to keep the child safe during the investigation. Beatrice knew exactly how to manipulate the system to get Lily out of my house and secure access to that $10 million trust fund. I did not panic. Panic is a civilian luxury. I walked straight to my kitchen, grabbed my secure cell phone, and dialed the only person in this family who actually understood what we were up against. Simone answered on the first ring. She sounded wide awake. "Beatrice just sent the police and CPS to my house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "She submitted a forged medical file claiming I am a violent schizophrenic. I have a custody hearing in exactly 48 hours. I need your help." Simone let out a sharp breath of disgust. "That woman has absolutely no rock bottom. I am at my downtown office. Get over here right now. We have work to do." I grabbed my keys, verified the house security system was locked down tight to protect sleeping Lily, and drove straight to the financial district. Simone's accounting firm occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, glass-fronted high-rise. When I walked into her massive corner office, the espresso machine was already hissing and she was surrounded by glowing dual monitors displaying complex financial spreadsheets. Simone looked like a general preparing for war. "We divide and conquer," Simone said, handing me a steaming mug of dark roast coffee. Beatrice always hid her dirty money through a labyrinth of dummy corporations and offshore trusts. She assumed no one in this family was smart enough to actually check her math. She used to mock my state school accounting degree at Thanksgiving dinner, bragging about her Ivy League wealth managers. Well, those Ivy League managers are sloppy. I am going to follow the money and find exactly how she is funding this legal assault. I set my coffee down and pulled out my encrypted military laptop, setting it on the glass conference table. And I am going to hunt down the digital ghost of whatever doctor she paid to sign that fake medical file. The room went completely silent except for the rapid, intense clacking of our keyboards. We were two women operating at the absolute peak of our respective fields, forming an alliance that Beatrice could never even comprehend. I bypassed standard civilian firewalls and accessed the secure portal of the county family court system. Using my Cyber Command credentials, I pulled the metadata from the emergency custody filing Beatrice's lawyer had submitted. Attached to the filing was a highly detailed psychiatric evaluation bearing the digital signature of a Dr. Arthur Vance. I immediately ran his name and medical license number through the National Medical Registry. My screen flooded with bright red alert flags. Arthur Vance was not a psychiatrist. He was a disgraced general practitioner. 3 years ago, the medical board had permanently revoked his license for running a massive prescription pill mill out of a rundown strip mall on the edge of the city. He had narrowly avoided federal prison by turning state's evidence against his partners. This was a man desperate for cash and completely devoid of morals. I traced the IP address of the email containing the forged diagnosis. Vance had tried to be clever by routing his connection through a cheap commercial virtual private network, hoping to mask his location. It took me less than 4 minutes to shatter his encryption. The signal originated from a luxury condo complex right here in downtown Boston. Arthur Vance was living far above his means for an unemployed, disgraced doctor. "I have our target," I announced, turning my laptop screen toward Simone. "Dr. Arthur Vance. He lost his medical license 3 years ago for illegal distribution. He has no authority to diagnose a cold, let alone severe schizophrenia. Beatrice must have found him through her shady country club connections." Simone's eyes lit up with a fierce, predatory gleam. "And I just found out how she convinced him to risk perjury." Simone tapped her manicured nail against her primary monitor. "Beatrice is bleeding cash, but she still controls a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. It is an account she usually uses to hide her assets from the IRS. Look at this timestamp, Tara. Exactly 12 hours before Arthur Vance submitted that fake psychiatric file to the family court, Beatrice authorized a wire transfer from that offshore account." Simone highlighted a specific line of code on the financial ledger. The money was routed through 3 different dummy accounts to make it look like a standard corporate consulting fee. But the final destination was a domestic bank account registered directly to Arthur Vance. $50,000, I said, reading the exact amount. She paid him $50,000 to invent a mental illness so she could steal my daughter. "We have her," Simone said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "This is irrefutable proof of financial fraud, bribery of a medical professional, and perjury. We take this to the judge in 48 hours, and Beatrice leaves that courtroom in handcuffs." Simone hit a button on her keyboard, and the heavy commercial printer in the corner of the office hummed to life, rapidly spitting out the bank routing numbers, the wire transfer receipts, and the IP tracking data. We had the ultimate weapon. Just as I reached over to grab the freshly printed evidence, the heavy glass door of Simone's office was violently thrown open. Simone's husband Connor practically stumbled into the room. He looked absolutely terrified. He was sweating through his expensive dress shirt, his tie was undone, and he was clutching his cell phone like it was a live grenade. Connor was Liam's younger brother, a man who had spent his entire life desperately seeking his mother's approval and bending to her every demand. Simone stood up, immediately recognizing the sheer panic on her husband's face. "Connor, what is going on? Why are you here?" Connor looked between me and Simone, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. "She knows," he stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "My mother knows what you are doing." Simone narrowed her eyes. How could she possibly know she has alerts set up on the offshore accounts? Connor said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. She saw the unauthorized access ping from your firm's IP address. She just called me Simone. She was screaming. She knows you are helping Tara track the money. Connor took a shaky step forward, reaching out toward his wife. Simone, you have to stop. You have to drop this right now. She told me that if you do not back off and delete everything you found, she is going to call her friends on the banking commission. She is going to freeze all your corporate assets, trigger a massive federal audit, and completely destroy this accounting firm. She said she will bankrupt us by morning. Connor paced the length of the glass-enclosed office, his breathing erratic and shallow. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. You do not understand what that woman is capable of, Simone. She has politicians on speed dial. She plays golf with the head of the banking commission. If you expose her offshore accounts, she will not just bankrupt us. She will make sure your CPA license is revoked. She will salt the earth. We have to delete the files. Simone did not flinch. She remained perfectly still behind her massive mahogany desk, her posture radiating absolute authority. She let Connor exhaust his panicked pacing before she finally spoke, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. Ruin us with what money, Connor? I just showed you the ledger. Your mother is operating a financial house of cards. She is $15 million in the red. Those politicians and banking officials she brags about will drop her the second they realize her accounts are empty and she is under federal investigation for wire fraud. Connor stopped pacing. His shoulders slumped. She is my mother, Simone. She always wins. She has crushed every person who ever stood against her. Simone stood up slowly, her palms resting flat against the glass surface of her desk. She did not win because she is a genius, Connor. She won because she bullied cowards who were too afraid to look at the math. I built this firm from the ground up. I did not use a single dime of Blackwell Trust Fund money. I earned my license. I earned my clients. And I earned my reputation. Beatrice cannot touch my firm because my firm is built on concrete, whereas her entire empire is built on quicksand and lies. Connor looked at the floor, unable to meet his wife's eyes. We could just walk away. We do not have to be involved in this custody battle. Tara can handle herself. I watched the exchange from the corner of the room, my hands resting lightly on the keyboard of my encrypted laptop. I remained completely silent, letting Simone fight this battle. It was a defining moment for their marriage. Simone walked around the desk and stopped inches from her husband. Liam was your brother. He was the only person in your toxic family who treated me with an ounce of respect, and he died trying to protect his little girl from that monster you call a mother. Beatrice submitted a forged psychiatric evaluation to steal a child so she could raid a $10 million trust fund. If you think I am going to delete this evidence and let that happen, you do not know the woman you married. Simone pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the heavy glass door. You have spent your entire life apologizing for existing in her shadow. You have let her dictate your career, your finances, and your self-worth. But she does not dictate my life. So here is your choice, Connor. You either stand here in this room with your wife and help us protect Liam's daughter, or you walk out that door and go cower behind your mother's heavily mortgaged skirts. But understand this clearly. If you walk out that door to protect her, do not bother coming back to my house tonight. Connor swallowed hard. He looked at Simone, his eyes searching her face for any sign of a bluff. He found nothing but cold, hardened steel. He turned his head and looked at me. I held his gaze, my expression completely unreadable, offering no comfort and no out. He was a man being crushed between the weight of his mother's lifelong psychological abuse and his wife's unyielding moral compass. I am sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I cannot let her destroy us. He turned on his heel, pushed open the heavy glass door, and practically ran down the hallway toward the elevators. Simone watched him go, her jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in her cheek. She did not shed a tear. She simply turned back to her workstation, her eyes flashing with a terrifying resolve. Let us finish burying her, Simone said, reaching for her mouse. Before her hand even touched the device, The three massive monitors on her desk simultaneously flickered. The glowing spreadsheets vanished, replaced by a stark black screen filled with rapidly scrolling green code. A harsh electronic siren began blaring from the firm's internal servers. Simone's fingers flew across her keyboard, her eyes darting across the incoming data packets. We have a massive external intrusion. Someone is bypassing our primary firewalls. They are targeting the local drives and the cloud backups simultaneously. They are trying to wipe the audit files. Beatrice did not wait for Connor to convince you, I said, immediately pulling my laptop toward me. She hired outside contractors to burn your servers to the ground. I cracked my knuckles and engaged my terminal. Step aside, Simone. Let me introduce them to the United States Cyber Command. I bypassed Simone's commercial security software and established a direct secure uplink to my military server farm back at the warehouse. The civilian hackers Beatrice had hired were aggressive, launching a brute force attack designed to overwhelm the system with sheer volume. It was a loud, messy tactic typical of expensive corporate fixers who relied on intimidation rather than skill. They were expecting to fight a frightened accountant. They had no idea they had just engaged an active-duty cyber warfare officer. I isolated their intrusion payload within seconds, trapping their malicious code inside a digital sandbox before it could touch Simone's financial files. Once they were locked in the containment protocol, I did not just block their access. I traced their digital footprints backward. They were routing through multiple proxy servers in Eastern Europe to mask their location, but their operational security was arrogant and sloppy. I slipped through their back doors, following the data stream directly to its origin point. They are operating out of a private server cluster registered to Beatrice's primary holding company. I announced, my fingers flying across the keys. They left their front door wide open. What are you doing? Simone asked, watching the complex command lines reflect in my eyes. I am cutting off her supply lines, I replied. I compiled a customized, weaponized payload designed for total network paralysis. It was a sophisticated ransomware architecture, but without any demand for payment. It was a pure search and destroy mission. I launched the countervirus directly into Beatrice's corporate network. On the screen, we watched the payload detonate. It systematically encrypted every hard drive, locked every email server, froze every internal banking portal, and scrambled the access credentials for her entire executive staff. I watched the traffic flatline as her entire operation went dark. She is offline, I said, leaning back in my chair and closing my laptop. She cannot move money, she cannot send an email, and she cannot access a single digital asset. She is completely paralyzed. Simone stared at the screens, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. We have the wire transfers, we have the fake doctor's IP address, and now she is locked out of her own war room. We are going to obliterate her in family court tomorrow. My secure burner phone vibrated sharply against the glass conference table. It was an encrypted channel, a number I had given to exactly one person outside of my immediate command structure. I picked it up and accepted the call. Tara Preston. Mrs. Preston, it is. Mac, the voice on the other end said. Mac was the master auto mechanic who owned the secure storage lot where Liam's wrecked car had been sitting for the past 3 months. The police had ruled the crash a tragic accident caused by black ice and high speeds. The insurance company was scheduled to officially write off the vehicle and send it to the scrapyard tomorrow morning. I had paid Mac under the table to hold it and conduct one final independent inspection. Mac, I said, the adrenaline from the cyber attack immediately shifting into cold dread. What did you find? There was a heavy pause on the line, accompanied by the metallic clang of a wrench hitting a concrete floor. Ma'am, I just pulled the undercarriage panel to check the fluid reservoirs before the tow truck gets here. I am looking right at it. The brake lines were not faulty. They did not burst from the impact. Mac lowered his voice, the sound chillingly clear in the quiet office. They were intentionally severed. Clean cuts. Your husband did not have an accident, Mrs. Preston. He was murdered. I hung up the phone. The air in Simone's office suddenly felt thin, devoid of oxygen. Simone was staring at me, her hands frozen over her keyboard, recognizing the absolute shift in my posture. I did not explain. I simply told her to secure the financial data and lock down the physical office. I was leaving the digital battlefield and entering the physical one. It took me 20 minutes to cross the city to Mac's secure storage facility. It was a bleak, corrugated metal building, surrounded by razor wire and heavy industrial security cameras. Mac was waiting for me by the rolling steel door, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. His face was grim, etched with the kind of heavy sorrow that only comes from delivering the worst possible news. He didn't say a word as I walked inside. He just hit the button to lower the bay door, sealing us in the cavernous, echoing garage. Liam's car sat in the center of the concrete floor under harsh fluorescent lights. The front end was a crumpled, unrecognizable mass of steel and shattered glass. I forced my military training to the forefront, pushing down the rising tide of bile in my throat. I approached the wreckage not as a grieving widow, but as an investigator analyzing a crime scene. Mac led me to the undercarriage, shining a heavy-duty tactical flashlight into the dark recesses of the wheel well. "I have been a mechanic for 40 years, Mrs. Preston." Mac said, his voice echoing slightly. "I know what an impact fracture looks like. I know what wear and tear looks like." "This is neither." He pointed the beam of light at a severed braided steel line. The cut was razor-sharp, pristine, and deliberate. It had not been torn apart by the force of hitting the guardrail. It had been sliced with heavy-duty bolt cutters, leaving just enough line intact so the brakes would function normally for a few miles before the pressure caused the remaining metal to snap. It was a calculated, delayed death trap. Mac handed me a thick manila folder. Inside were dozens of high-resolution macro photographs of the severed lines taken from every conceivable angle, alongside a sworn, notarized affidavit bearing his signature and professional credentials. "He did not suffer," Mac added quietly, stepping back. "The fluid drain was sudden. He would have lost pressure instantly on that downhill curve. It was over in seconds." I stared at the photographs, the glossy paper heavy in my hands. The pieces of the tactical puzzle slammed into place with terrifying absolute clarity. Beatrice was $15 million in debt. She was facing total financial ruin, the loss of her social standing, and likely federal prison for her offshore tax evasion. Liam, always brilliant, had discovered the rot in his mother's empire. He had quietly liquidated his assets to build a $10 million fortress around Lily, ensuring Beatrice could never touch our daughter's future. But Beatrice found out. She realized the only way to access that $10 million was to become Lily's legal guardian. And the only way to do that was to remove Lily's parents from the equation. She did not just orchestrate a custody battle. She manufactured my widowhood. She murdered her own son to pay off her debts. I walked over to the driver's side door of the ruined car, running my fingertips over the scratched, dented metal. Liam had always been my shield against his family's relentless toxicity. I remembered our very first Thanksgiving together. Beatrice had cornered me in the kitchen, launching into a vicious whispered tirade about my working-class background, my lack of pedigree, my unsuitability for her golden boy. Liam had walked into the room, assessed the situation instantly, and physically stepped between us. He had taken my hand, looked his mother dead in the eye, and told her that if she ever spoke to me with anything less than absolute respect, she would never see him again. He absorbed her poison so I wouldn't have to. He protected me from the monsters in his own bloodline. I gripped the edge of the shattered window frame, my knuckles turning white. He had died protecting us. Now I was going to obliterate the woman who killed him. I left Mac's garage and got into my car. I did not drive to the police station. The police had already ruled this an accident. Handing them a mechanic's affidavit would only trigger a slow bureaucratic investigation. Beatrice had state senators and judges in her pocket. She would hear about the investigation before the ink was dry, and use her remaining leverage to flee the country or bury the evidence. I needed to break her completely right now in the open. I drove straight to the Oak Haven Country Club. It was Beatrice's sanctuary, the epicenter of her fake, curated existence. I abandoned my car at the valet stand, ignoring the attendant shouting about parking protocols. I bypassed the grand clubhouse, entirely marching straight onto the pristine emerald green grass of the golf course. I found her on the ninth hole. Beatrice was dressed in a crisp white polo and a pleated skirt, laughing with three other wealthy socialites as she selected a club from her caddy. She was the picture of unbothered affluence, celebrating her morning victory, completely unaware that Simone and I had just crippled her digital empire. She saw me approaching and her fake smile instantly vanished, replaced by a scowl of profound irritation. "Tara, you are trespassing," Beatrice snapped, gripping her 9-iron. "You are violating the dress code, and you are embarrassing yourself. Security is going to drag you out of here." I did not stop walking until I was standing inches from her face, invading her personal space. Her country club friends gasped, stepping back from the sheer radiating intensity of my presence. I looked down at Beatrice, stripping away every ounce of my suburban mother facade, letting the cold, lethal gaze of a military officer take over. I leaned in, bringing my lips right next to her ear, and delivered the tactical strike. "I know about the breaks, Beatrice. I know exactly how you killed him." I pulled back and watched the blood completely drain from her face. Her eyes widened in absolute primal terror. The 9-iron slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the manicured grass with a dull thud. Her meticulously constructed mask shattered into a million pieces, leaving nothing but a panicked, cornered murderer staring back at me. She looked at my face, realizing I had the proof, realizing I was going to burn her life to the ground. Desperation seized her. Beatrice stumbled backward, threw her hands in the air, and let out a blood-curdling, theatrical scream that echoed across the entire fairway. "Help me!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest as golf carts from neighboring holes began speeding in our direction. "Security, help me. This woman is crazy. She is attacking me. Call the police. She is trying to kill me." 4 security guards in golf carts swarmed the green within seconds of Beatrice's theatrical scream. 2 local police cruisers arrived less than 3 minutes later, their sirens wailing as they tore across the manicured grass. Beatrice immediately collapsed into the arms of the lead officer, sobbing a perfectly rehearsed story about how I had ambushed her, threatened her life, and appeared completely detached from reality. The officers did not ask for my statement. They did not review the clubhouse security cameras. One officer roughly grabbed my arms, forced them behind my back, and snapped cold steel handcuffs over my wrists. I did not struggle. I let them push me into the back of the cruiser. Resisting arrest was exactly the physical altercation Beatrice needed to solidify her forged psychiatric evaluation. The local precinct smelled of cheap pine cleaner and stale sweat. They placed me in a concrete holding cell at the end of a long fluorescent-lit corridor. They did not process my fingerprints. They did not read me my Miranda rights. They simply locked the heavy iron bars and left me sitting on a metal bench. 30 minutes later, the heavy corridor door swung open. Beatrice walked in. She was not crying anymore. She had a steaming cup of artisan coffee in one hand and her designer handbag over her shoulder. The desk sergeant who escorted her actually pulled up a chair so she could sit comfortably outside my cell. "You really thought you could outplay me?" Beatrice said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. A mechanic's wild theory about brake lines. "You have nothing. No one will ever believe a woman currently sitting in a holding cell pending charges for aggravated assault and terroristic threats. You handed me the final puzzle piece, Tara." She leaned closer to the bars, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "By morning, the judge will see the police report of your violent, unprovoked attack on a golf course. He will grant the emergency custody order before breakfast. Lily will be in my house, and my control over her trust fund will be absolute. You are going to spend the next 10 years in a psychiatric facility. You should have just taken a buyout when Liam died. Now you lose everything." I looked at her, my expression completely void of the terror she so desperately wanted to see. I stood up smoothly, walking to the front of the cell. I looked past her to the desk sergeant leaning casually against the doorframe. "I have been detained for over an hour without being formally charged. I said, my voice projecting an unwavering, commanding authority. I am invoking my right to my one phone call. Deny it, and I will personally ensure you spend the remainder of your career directing traffic in a school zone. The sergeant scowled, glancing nervously at Beatrice. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, a smirk playing on her lips. Let her call her cheap public defender, she sneered. It changes nothing. The sergeant handed a cordless phone through the bars. I did not dial Simone. I did not dial a civilian lawyer. I dialed a secure unlisted number that routed directly to the E-ring of the Pentagon. The line clicked open after a single ring. General Clayton. I said, my posture snapping into rigid military attention despite the bleak concrete surroundings. This is Major Tara Preston, United States Cyber Command. Major, the gravelly voice of my commanding general replied instantly. Your terminal went dark 40 minutes ago. Report your status. I have been unlawfully detained by a compromised local police precinct in Oak Haven. I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to Beatrice and the sergeant. I am currently being held without charges at the direction of a hostile civilian target who is attempting to leverage local law enforcement to facilitate severe financial fraud and child endangerment. I am requesting immediate federal intervention. There was a fraction of a second of dead silence on the line. General Clayton did not tolerate the harassment of his officers. Understood, Major. Sit tight. I am bringing the hammer down. The line went dead. I handed the phone back through the bars. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that betrayed a tiny sliver of unease. General Clayton. Are we playing pretend military now? You are a desk jockey for the government, Tara. You are a nobody. I returned to the metal bench and sat down. I did not say another word. The silence stretched for exactly 10 minutes. Then the heavy, reinforced doors of the precinct did not just open. They were practically torn off their hinges. The local chief of police sprinted down the corridor. He was a large, imposing man, but right now he looked entirely deflated. His face was the color of wet ash, and sweat poured down his forehead, soaking the collar of his uniform. He shoved the desk sergeant aside so violently the younger man stumbled into the wall. The chief fumbled with a massive ring of keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice, before finally jamming the right key into the lock of my cell. The heavy iron door swung open with a harsh screech. Major Preston, the chief gasped, struggling to catch his breath, his chest heaving. I am so deeply sorry. This is a massive misunderstanding, a catastrophic error by my junior officers. You are free to go, completely free. All records of your detention have already been scrubbed from the system. Beatrice stood up, her jaw dropping in utter disbelief. Chief Miller, what are you doing? She demanded, stepping forward and pointing an accusing finger. She assaulted me. You work for me. The chief turned on her, his eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated panic. Shut up, Beatrice, he roared, completely shattering their cozy, corrupt country club dynamic. Do you have any idea who you just had me lock up? I just had the Secretary of Defense's office threaten to send federal marshals to dismantle my precinct brick by brick. I stepped out of the cell, slowly smoothing the fabric of my jacket. I walked right past Beatrice, not giving her a single glance, treating her as if she were completely invisible. As I reached the end of the corridor, the chief of police snapped his heels together and delivered a crisp, trembling salute. I did not return it. I pushed through the double doors and walked out into the cool evening air. Inside the corridor, Beatrice stood completely paralyzed. The reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was not fighting a grieving suburban widow. She was fighting a highly trained federal weapon, and she was losing on every single front. Her offshore accounts were frozen, her digital footprint was destroyed, and her local bought and paid for influence had just been obliterated in less than 10 minutes. Panic, cold, and absolute seized her chest. She realized her money could not protect her from the storm I was bringing down on her head. She pulled her phone from her designer bag with shaking hands. She opened a text thread with her high-priced family court lawyer. Her manicured fingers fumbled frantically over the glass screen as she typed the only desperate option she had left. Pay the judge whatever he wants. We destroy her tomorrow morning. Morning broke with the harsh glare of news vans blocking my driveway. Less than 24 hours remained until I had to walk into family court, and Beatrice was utilizing a scorched earth strategy. The perimeter alarms of my security system chimed relentlessly. I stood in the kitchen sipping black coffee, watching the live feeds on my monitor. Over a dozen paparazzi and tabloid reporters were swarming my front gate, their camera flashes strobing against the reinforced glass of my living room windows. They were shouting my name, holding up microphones and trampling the rose bushes Liam and I had planted the previous spring. My secure phone vibrated with a push notification from the local digital tabloid. Beatrice had called in every favor she had left in the media world to launch a coordinated character assassination. Deranged widow plots to steal Blackwell fortune child in danger. The article was a masterpiece of fabricated panic. It detailed anonymous tips claiming I was a mentally unstable, unemployed shut-in who suffered from violent paranoid delusions. The author painted Beatrice as the heroic grieving grandmother, desperately trying to save her granddaughter from a mother who had completely lost her grip on reality. The most disgusting paragraph implied that Liam had been planning to file for sole custody and divorce just days before his tragic accident, suggesting my mental decline was the true cause of our family's tragedy. I felt a cold, familiar rage tighten my chest. I remembered the night Liam had brought me to his family's annual gala. Beatrice had spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive remarks about my military service, implying I was unrefined, damaged, and unstable. Liam had not hesitated. He had taken the microphone from the band, publicly praised my character and my service, and then walked me out of the ballroom, refusing to speak to his mother for 6 months. He had spent our entire marriage standing as an impenetrable shield against his family's relentless toxicity. Now that he was gone, it was my turn to be the shield. I silently vowed that Beatrice would never touch a single thread of his legacy. I activated the house lockdown protocol. The automated steel privacy shutters descended over every window, plunging the first floor into cool shadows and instantly silencing the shouting reporters outside. I went down to the basement and set Lily up in the soundproofed media room with her favorite animated movie, ensuring she remained completely shielded from the circus outside. As I returned to the kitchen, a secondary alarm pinged softly. It was the rear property line sensor. Someone was bypassing the woods behind the estate, avoiding the main road entirely. I tapped the security feed. It was Simone. She was wearing a dark trench coat, scaling the low stone retaining wall and quickly slipping through the dense rhododendron bushes. I unlocked the reinforced back door. Simone slipped inside, breathing heavily, and immediately dropped a thick leather satchel onto the granite kitchen island. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly messy, but her eyes were burning with a fierce, triumphant fire. "Your front yard looks like a circus," Simone said, shrugging off her coat. "Beatrice is terrified. She knows we locked her out of her offshore accounts, so she had to liquidate hard assets locally to fund this final push. She is throwing a Hail Mary." Simone unzipped the satchel and pulled out a stack of freshly printed financial ledgers, slamming them down on the counter. "Look at this transaction," Simone commanded, pointing to a line highlighted in bright red ink. "Yesterday afternoon, right after you confronted her on the golf course, Beatrice panicked. She needed untraceable cash immediately. So she leveraged the one thing she swore she would never touch. She took out a massive, high-interest blind mortgage on the Blackwell ancestral estate." I leaned over the documents. "Where did the money go?" Simone traced the routing numbers with her pen. $250,000 wired directly to a boutique corporate consulting firm registered in Delaware. But the firm is a ghost entity. It produces no products and offers no actual services. The registered agent for the firm is a man named Marcus Thorne. The name instantly triggered a match in my mental database. I had seen that name during my cyber infiltration of the county family court portal. "Marcus Thorne is the third-party mediator assigned to our custody dispute," I said, the magnitude of the corruption settling over me. "Exactly," Simone said, a grim smile on her face. "Beatrice literally bought the referee. That $250,000 bribe is her guarantee. Thorne is mandated to submit a psychological evaluation recommendation to the judge tomorrow morning." For $250,000, he is going to recommend that you be deemed an imminent threat to your child, giving the judge all the legal cover he needs to strip you of custody. We had the proof of the bribe, the forged medical file, the offshore fraud, and the mechanic's affidavit regarding the severed brake lines. But walking into a courtroom where the mediator and the judge were both on Beatrice's payroll was a tactical nightmare. We were stepping into a rigged arena. Before we could formulate our countermeasure, another chime echoed from the security console. The rear motion sensor had been tripped again. I pulled up the camera feed, expecting to see a stray reporter who had wandered around the perimeter. Instead, I saw an older gentleman in a bespoke charcoal suit. He was clutching a briefcase to his chest, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the tree line. It was David Sterling. He was the senior managing partner at the law firm Liam had used to establish Lily's $10 million trust fund. He was a man of absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty to my late husband. I quickly opened the back door. Sterling stepped into the kitchen, his usually immaculate posture slightly hunched with urgency. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, looking from me to Simone. "Tara, I do not have much time," Sterling said, his voice hushed and strained. "Beatrice's lawyers just stormed my office with a highly questionable emergency subpoena. They are tearing the place apart, trying to seize Liam's original trust files and estate directives. I managed to slip out the freight elevator before they could confiscate my personal safe." Sterling set his briefcase on the kitchen island. His hands were shaking slightly as he popped the brass latches. He did not pull out a stack of paper documents or legal briefs. Instead, he reached inside and withdrew a heavy military-grade encrypted tablet sealed in a reinforced titanium case. He placed the locked device gently on the granite counter, sliding it toward me. "Liam came to see me 2 weeks before he died." Sterling set his eyes locking onto mine with intense gravity. He was worried. "He gave me this and made me swear to keep it off the firm's network. Liam told me to give this to you if his mother ever tried to take Lily. He said you would know the password." I stared at the glowing biometric screen of the tablet. Sterling stepped back, giving me space while Simone watched with bated breath. The prompt requested a 12-digit alphanumeric passcode. I did not hesitate. My fingers moved across the digital keyboard with practiced precision, typing the sequence 4236017100705. They were the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of the specific park bench overlooking the Charles River, where Liam and I had shared our very first conversation 12 years ago. It was a secret, solely ours, a quiet testament to the day my life truly began. The screen unlocked with a soft electronic chime. A single video file sat on the encrypted desktop titled, "Simply with my name." I pressed play. Liam's face filled the screen. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes betraying the immense crushing weight he had been carrying in his final weeks. But his voice was steady and absolute. "Tara," his digital ghost spoke, making the breath catch in my throat. "If David gave you this tablet, it means my mother has finally crossed the point of no return. It means I am gone and she is coming for Lily." He paused, looking directly into the camera lens, as if he could see me standing in our kitchen. "I spent my life shielding you from the truth of my family's wealth, hoping we could just live our lives in peace, insulated from her poison. But you need the weapon to destroy her." Liam took a deep breath, and then he laid out the entirety of his mother's empire. He detailed Beatrice's sprawling financial history with clinical precision. For 30 years, her elite wealth management firm had not been investing her clients' money. It was a sophisticated, multi-tiered Ponzi scheme. She had been systematically siphoning tens of millions of dollars from the retirement accounts of her own friends, business partners, local charities, and powerful politicians, funneling the stolen cash into offshore shell companies to fund her extravagant, untouchable lifestyle. She was not a brilliant financial mind. She was a prolific predatory thief who was now completely insolvent. "I have uploaded the master ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, the dummy corporation charters, and the hidden server access codes to this device," Liam continued, his voice hardening. "It is enough irrefutable evidence to put her in federal prison for the rest of her natural life. She is a parasite Terra and a profound danger to anyone she considers an obstacle. She will stop at nothing to get her hands on Lily's trust fund to plug the holes in her sinking ship. He leaned closer to the camera, his expression shifting from that of a loving husband to a man issuing a dire warning to the world. My mother thinks she is dealing with a soft, easily manipulated suburban widow. She thinks her money and her connections make her a god. She has absolutely no idea that my wife is a colonel in the United States Army Cyber Command. Do whatever it takes, Tara. Unleash hell. End her empire. Protect our daughter. The screen went black. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by the sound of Simone exhaling a shaky, ragged breath. We had the smoking gun. We had the undeniable proof of decades of financial crimes handed down by the very son Beatrice had murdered to protect her secrets. Before Sterling could utter a single word, a deafening crash shattered the quiet. The heavy reinforced glass of the French doors leading to the back patio splintered inward, the security film holding it together just long enough to buckle under the immense force of a heavy steel breaching ram. The perimeter alarms I had set earlier began to shriek, a piercing, high-pitched wail that flooded the first floor with noise. 3 men stormed into the kitchen through the ruined doors. They were dressed in sterile black tactical gear, their faces obscured by heavy neoprene balaclavas. They were not local street thugs or cheap hired muscle. They moved with a synchronized fluid efficiency, sweeping their muzzles across the room, in a textbook room-clearing formation that marked them as highly paid private military contractors. Beatrice had unleashed her final desperate strike to steal the ledgers Simone had brought, seize the tablet, and permanently silence anyone in the house. Simone screamed, dropping to the floor and pulling her heavy leather briefcase over her head. Sterling froze against the cabinetry in sheer, paralyzing terror. I did not scream. I did not reach for my phone to dial emergency services. I had spent 2 decades training for kinetic close-quarters combat, and my physiological response was instantaneous and coldly calculated. Call the state police, Simone. I ordered, my voice cutting through the blaring alarm with icy, unwavering authority. The lead contractor lunged toward the kitchen island, his eyes locked on the encrypted tablet and Simone's printed ledgers scattered across the granite. He reached into his tactical vest, drawing a heavy suppressed pistol. He never had the chance to level the barrel. I launched myself over the corner of the counter, closing the distance before his brain could register the sudden explosive movement. I grabbed the barrel of his weapon, wrenching it violently upward and twisting his wrist backward until the bones snapped with a loud, sickening crack. The man let out a muffled grunt of agony as the gun clattered harmlessly to the floor. I did not pause. I drove my right elbow directly into his throat, collapsing his windpipe, and simultaneously swept his heavy combat boots out from under him. He hit the hardwood floor with a massive thud and did not move. The second contractor hesitated for a fraction of a second, shocked by the brutal, instantaneous neutralization of his point man. That microscopic hesitation was his undoing. I pivoted smoothly on my heel, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet that had been resting on the stovetop. I swung it with devastating rotational force. The thick iron connected flush with the side of his tactical helmet, the metallic impact ringing sharply through the kitchen. He dropped instantly, completely unconscious, before he hit the ground. The third man abandoned his objective. Realizing he was trapped in a confined space with a highly lethal operative, he dropped his stance, reached for a serrated combat knife strapped to his thigh, and lunged directly at my chest. I sidestepped the blade with a pivot step, trapping his extended arm tightly under my armpit. I applied a brutal, leveraging joint lock, hyperextending his shoulder until the joint popped loudly out of its socket. As he screamed into his balaclava, I delivered a punishing knee strike to his floating ribs, hearing them fracture under the heavy impact. I grabbed the thick nylon webbing at the back of his tactical vest and slammed his face downward into the sharp edge of the granite counter. He slid to the floor, groaning and clutching his ruined shoulder, entirely incapacitated. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Shattered glass covered the floor, mixing with the spilled contents of Simone's satchel and the blood of the mercenaries, but the evidence was secure. The entire engagement had lasted less than 20 seconds. I stood over the three neutralized contractors, my breathing perfectly controlled, my heart rate steadily returning to a calm, resting pace. The wail of approaching sirens bled through the shattered patio doors, growing louder by the second. Simone had managed to hit the panic button on her phone, bypassing the corrupt local precinct entirely and connecting directly to the state police dispatch. Red and blue lights began flashing rapidly across the front windows, casting erratic strobe-like shadows across the ruined kitchen. I bent down, retrieved the encrypted tablet from the counter, and wiped a speck of dust from the titanium casing. I looked at Simone, who was slowly standing up from behind the island, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and profound, terrified awe. "The local police will not be able to sweep this under the rug," I said, stepping over the groaning contractor and adjusting the cuffs of my sweater. "We have the physical evidence, we have three of her hired mercenaries bleeding on my floor, and we have the digital confession. Let Beatrice try to buy her way out of this." State police cruisers skidded onto the driveway, their tires tearing through the manicured lawn and crushing the ruined rose bushes. Heavy boots pounded against the front porch before the front door was thrown open. 6 state troopers flooded the foyer with their weapons drawn, sweeping the area and shouting commands. They moved with urgency, expecting to find a terrified civilian family under siege. They froze the moment they reached the kitchen threshold. The scene before them looked like the aftermath of a military strike. Shattered glass blanketed the floor. One heavy contractor lay unconscious near the stove, his helmet dented. Another was groaning on the floor, clutching a dislocated shoulder and fractured ribs. The lead mercenary was slumped against the kitchen island, gasping for air through a crushed windpipe, his weapon kicked safely out of reach. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my posture relaxed, but completely alert, holding the encrypted titanium tablet. Simone was peeking over the granite counter, her hands shaking as she clutched her satchel of financial documents. "Drop your weapons and identify yourselves!" The lead trooper shouted, his service pistol leveled squarely at my chest. I did not flinch. I slowly raised my free hand, keeping my movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Major Tara Preston, United States Army Cyber Command." I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the moans of the injured men. "These 3 individuals are private military contractors hired by a civilian target to execute a home invasion and destroy federal evidence. They are disarmed and neutralized. I suggest you call for 3 ambulances and a heavy transport unit." The trooper lowered his weapon slightly, glancing from me to the brutalized men on the floor, utterly bewildered by the surgical violence inflicted by a single woman in a suburban kitchen. Within minutes, the house was swarming with law enforcement. General Clayton had clearly made his promised phone calls because a state police captain arrived shortly after, treating the scene with the utmost gravity. Paramedics loaded the groaning mercenaries onto stretchers, securing their wrists with heavy nylon zip ties before wheeling them out to the waiting ambulances. By midnight, the police had finished processing the scene, leaving 2 marked cruisers parked at the end of my driveway for security. The house was quiet again, the cool night air blowing through the shattered patio doors. Simone sat at the dining room table, furiously typing on her laptop, backing up the master ledgers and Liam's video confession to a secure cloud server. My secure cell phone vibrated against the granite counter. The caller ID displayed the name of Beatrice's elite corporate law firm. I let it ring 3 times before pressing answer and putting it on speakerphone so Simone could hear. "Major Preston," a smooth, heavily polished voice said. "This is Arthur Vance, Senior Counsel for Beatrice Blackwell. I am calling to extend a highly lucrative, mutually beneficial olive branch. Your client sent 3 armed mercenaries to my home with the intent to murder me and destroy evidence." I replied, my tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "You are calling a crime scene, Mr. Vance. Let us not resort to theatrics." Tara Vance chuckled, though a nervous tremor betrayed his feigned confidence. "Beatrice is prepared to be incredibly generous. We are offering a guaranteed $20 million payout deposited directly into a tax-free offshore account of your choosing by morning. In exchange, you simply sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, drop the assault allegations, and voluntarily surrender primary custody of Lily. You take the money, you walk away, and you never have to work another day in your life. I stared at the bloodstains rapidly drying on my hardwood floor. Beatrice was backed into a corner, bleeding cash and desperate to buy her way out of a federal prison sentence. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "Extortion, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit murder carry mandatory federal minimum sentences. I highly advise you to retain your own independent criminal defense counsel before sunrise. I do not negotiate with terrorists, and I do not take bribes from parasites." I ended the call and blocked the number. Simone looked up from her screen, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "She is terrified," Simone said. "She knows the wall is crumbling." Before I could respond, a sharp, frantic knock echoed from the front door. I moved silently through the hallway, checking the security feed on my phone. Standing on my porch, illuminated by the harsh glare of the police cruiser spotlights, was Connor. Liam's younger brother looked absolutely wrecked. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was pulled loose, and he was pacing erratically. I unlocked the door and pulled him inside. Connor stepped into the foyer and stopped dead in his tracks. He looked past me into the kitchen, his eyes widening as he took in the shattered glass, the overturned furniture, and the dark smears of blood staining the pristine white cabinets. The reality of his mother's depravity, which he had spent his entire life ignoring and enabling, finally crashed down on him. "She really did it," Connor whispered, his voice cracking. His knees gave out and he slumped against the wall, burying his face in his hands. "I heard the police scanners. I heard the dispatch calls about armed men at your address. I thought she was just going to try to intimidate you. I did not think she would actually send killers to a house where Lily sleeps." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. The lifelong conditioning that had kept him subservient to Beatrice shattered right there in my hallway. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy red leather-bound book. "I knew about the offshore accounts, Tara. I always knew, but I was too much of a coward to stop her." Connor confessed, holding the book out to me with shaking hands. "Liam tried to warn me. He told me to get out before she pulled me down with her. This is the master physical ledger. I took it from her private wall safe an hour ago. It has her actual handwritten signatures authorizing every single fraudulent wire transfer and every bribe she has paid over the last decade. It links her directly to the shell companies." I took the heavy leather book from his hands. This was the final nail in Beatrice's coffin. The digital evidence was damning, but physical signatures tied directly to the stolen funds guaranteed a conviction. Connor had finally chosen his brother's family over his mother's empire. Simone came out of the dining room, taking the ledger and immediately beginning to scan the pages. "We have everything," she said, her voice filled with absolute awe. "It is a complete royal flush." Connor stood up, wiping his face. "I will testify," he said, his voice finally finding a backbone. "Whatever you need tomorrow, Tara. I am done hiding." I nodded, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Go home, Connor. Lock your doors. Do not answer any calls from your mother. Tomorrow we finish this." Connor left, slipping quietly out the front door under the watchful eyes of the state troopers. I walked back into the kitchen and began sweeping up the shattered glass, the rhythmic sound of the broom grounding me in the present moment. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone lit up on the counter. It was a text message from Beatrice. Despite losing her mercenaries, her bribes, and her leverage, her narcissism simply would not allow her to accept defeat. She still believed she was untouchable. The message read, "Enjoy your last night with Lily. Tomorrow she becomes a true heir and you go back to the gutter." I did not feel a shred of anger. I did not feel fear. I looked at the encrypted tablet, the stack of financial ledgers, and the signed physical evidence that was about to permanently eradicate Beatrice Blackwell from polite society. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the digital keyboard. I typed 2 simple cold words that sealed her fate. "Roger that." I set the phone face down on the granite counter. The screen went dark, sealing Beatrice's fate. Outside, the sky began to turn a bruised pale gray. Dawn was breaking over the estate, casting long shadows across the shattered glass and splintered wood of my kitchen floor. The state troopers were still stationed at the end of the driveway, their cruiser lights cutting through the early morning mist. The physical battlefield was secure. It was time to prepare for the legal one. I walked upstairs, the house silent except for the soft rhythmic hum of the climate control system. I bypassed the walk-in closet where I kept my civilian clothes. I ignored the tailored suits, the sensible cardigans, and the neutral tones I wore to blend into the background of Liam's affluent country club world. I walked to the back of the cedar-lined storage room, reaching for a heavy opaque garment bag sealed with a heavy-duty brass zipper. I had not opened it since the day I transitioned to the clandestine cyber division, trading physical deployments for digital warfare. I unzipped the bag. The faint smell of starch and polished brass greeted me. I stripped off my blood-spattered tactical sweater and began to dress. I pulled on the crisp white shirt, aligning the seams with mechanical precision. I stepped into the dark blue trousers, the gold stripe running down the outer leg perfectly straight. Then came the jacket of my United States Army dress blues. The fabric was heavy structured, designed to command respect and project absolute authority. I stood before the full-length mirror and began pinning my hardware. I fastened the heavy silver eagles to my epaulets, securing my rank as a colonel. I pinned my combat ribbons over my left breast pocket, a colorful silent testament to a decade of classified operations, hostile engagements, and tactical victories. I secured the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Joint Service Commendation. Above the ribbons, I mounted my Master Cyber Warfare badge. I buttoned the brass buttons, adjusting the collar until it sat perfectly flush against my neck. I tied my hair back into a strict regulation bun, leaving not a single strand out of place. I looked at my reflection. The tired, grieving widow was completely gone. The woman staring back was a high-ranking military officer, a lethal operative prepared to annihilate a hostile threat. Looking at the silver eagles gleaming under the closet lights, a sharp, vivid memory of Liam surfaced. It was the night of the Armed Forces Gala 3 years ago. I had been standing in front of this exact mirror adjusting my medals, worried that I looked too rigid for a night of dancing. Liam had walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He had looked at my reflection, his eyes filled with absolute awe and unwavering pride. "You do not just wear that uniform, Tara," he had whispered, kissing my neck. "You own it. You are the most formidable woman I have ever met. You are my shield, and I pity anyone who ever mistakes your quietness for weakness." He had loved my strength, he had relied on it, and he had deliberately armed me with the ultimate weapon to protect our daughter when he could no longer do it himself. I broke away from the mirror. I walked to my home office and retrieved my reinforced tactical briefcase. I packed it with surgical precision. I slid Simone's forensic reports and the traced offshore routing numbers into the first compartment. I placed Connor's red leather master ledger, containing Beatrice's handwritten signatures, into the second. Finally, I took the heavy titanium tablet holding Liam's digital confession and secured it in the central padded sleeve. The briefcase weighed nearly 20 pounds. It held enough explosive evidence to tear the local family court system apart at the seams. I walked down the hall to Lily's room. She was sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the mercenaries, the bribes, and the impending courtroom war. I gently shook her shoulder, waking her with a soft smile. I helped her dress in a simple, bright yellow sundress, brushing her hair and tying it back with a matching ribbon. I kept my voice light and cheerful, shielding her from the crushing gravity of the morning. Before stepping out of my bedroom, I grabbed a long, ordinary beige trench coat. I draped it over my shoulders, buttoning it all the way up to my chin. The coat completely swallowed my uniform. It hid the silver eagles, smothered the combat ribbons, and masked the razor-sharp tailoring of my dress blues. To the outside world, to the paparazzi waiting at the gates, and to the corrupt judge waiting in the courtroom, I looked exactly like the woman Beatrice had described in her smear campaign. I looked like an exhausted, unremarkable suburban mother, entirely out of her depth and about to lose her child. We walked downstairs. I held Lily's small hand in my left hand, gripping the handle of the heavy briefcase in my right. We stepped out of the front door. The cool morning air hit my face as we walked down the driveway. The state troopers parted respectfully, holding the perimeter line as the swarm of tabloid reporters pressed against the wrought iron gates. The paparazzi shouted my name, their camera shutters clicking frantically, capturing images of the defeated widow in the oversized trench coat. I kept my head down, playing the part, perfectly securing Lily in her car seat before sliding behind the wheel. I drove through the city streets as the morning commute began. I parked 3 blocks away from the county courthouse, navigating the remaining distance on foot. The imposing stone steps of the courthouse loomed ahead. I could see Beatrice's legal team gathered near the massive brass doors, looking smug and victorious. Beatrice herself stood in the center of the gaggle of lawyers, wearing a tailored black morning dress, playing the role of the concerned, grieving matriarch for the press pool gathered on the plaza. I tightened my grip on Lily's hand. I adjusted the collar of my trench coat, ensuring not a single sliver of army blue or polished brass was visible. I walked up the marble steps, stepping directly into the belly of the corrupt machine, fully armed, entirely invisible, and ready to unleash hell. The morning air was thick with the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. I kept Lily tucked close to my side as we navigated the crowded plaza of the county courthouse. At the top of the wide marble steps, Beatrice was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She stood behind a cluster of microphones flanked by half a dozen men in $1,000 suits. She wore a custom black tweed Chanel suit complete with a tasteful mourning veil and a single strand of flawless South Sea pearls. She looked every inch the wealthy, devastated matriarch fighting to save her family's legacy. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, leaning into the microphones as she spoke to the sea of local reporters and tabloid photographers. "My heart breaks every single day for my son," Beatrice said, her voice quivering with expertly manufactured grief. "But today is about protecting my granddaughter. No child should be subjected to the chaotic, unstable environment her mother has created. I am here to provide a safe, secure, and loving home for Lily. We are simply asking the court to intervene before a tragedy occurs." A reporter near the front spotted me approaching the base of the steps. The swarm of cameras instantly pivoted, the blinding white flashes strobing against the dull, oversized fabric of my beige trench coat. The paparazzi began shouting questions, demanding to know if I was currently under psychiatric care or if I had squandered Liam's life insurance. I ignored them completely. I kept my chin leveled, guiding Lily up the marble stairs toward the heavy brass doors. Arthur Vance, Beatrice's lead counsel, stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop on the landing just below them. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the bulky, shapeless trench coat that completely swallowed my frame. He smiled, a cold, predatory smirk designed to project absolute dominance for the cameras. "Ms. Preston," Vance said, projecting his voice so the microphones would catch every word of his condescension, "I must say your choice of attire is certainly a bold strategy for a custody hearing. Showing up to federal court in a cheap, unwashed trench coat certainly corroborates our concerns about your declining mental state and inability to properly care for a child. Are you entirely sure you do not want to reconsider our settlement offer? There is no shame in admitting you are unfit to handle this pressure." The reporters scribbled frantically on their notepads, murmuring among themselves. Vance was expertly controlling the narrative, painting me as a destitute, unstable woman, completely out of her depth in the face of the Blackwell wealth. I did not respond to his bait. I simply adjusted my grip on the heavy tactical briefcase, holding the master ledgers, feeling the solid weight of the evidence anchoring me to the concrete floor. Before Vance could deliver another insult, the crowd of reporters suddenly parted. Simone pushed her way through the front row of photographers. She was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal blazer, carrying an armful of thick-bound forensic accounting reports. She marched directly up the steps and took her position slightly behind my left shoulder, glaring at Vance with open defiance. A second later, a much larger ripple went through the press pool. Connor stepped out from the sea of journalists. He was wearing a dark tailored suit, his jaw set in a rigid line of absolute determination. The flashing cameras doubled their frenzied pace as Liam's younger brother, the heir apparent to the Blackwell empire, ignored the reporters and walked straight up the marble steps. Beatrice lowered her silk handkerchief, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. She expected Connor to take his place beside her, to stand as a united front for the family legacy. Instead, Connor bypassed the wall of lawyers, stepped across the landing, and planted himself firmly behind my right shoulder, turning to face his mother. Beatrice's mask of the grieving grandmother instantly vaporized. The raw, vicious panic of a cornered predator flashed across her features. She abandoned the microphones, taking 2 aggressive steps toward us, completely ignoring the flashing cameras. "Connor, Beatrice," hissed her voice, dropping to a venomous whisper, meant only for us. "What are you doing? Get over here right now. You are making a fool of yourself and embarrassing this family in front of the press." Connor did not flinch. He looked at the woman who had manipulated him his entire life, the woman who had embezzled millions and sent armed mercenaries to a house where his niece was sleeping. "I am exactly where I need to be," Connor said, his voice ringing with a steady, unshakable clarity. Beatrice's face twisted in pure rage. "You spineless coward," she spat, taking another step forward. "You are betraying your own blood for that woman, for a nobody who is trying to steal everything your father and I built. You step away from her right now, or I swear to God I will cut you out of the trust completely. You will have absolutely nothing." Connor looked her dead in the eye, his posture radiating a profound, absolute freedom. "You have nothing left to threaten me with, Beatrice," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any familial affection. "You sent armed men to Tara's house. You put Lily in danger. You stole from your own clients. You are not my mother. You are dead to me." Beatrice recoiled as if she had been physically struck, the color completely drained from her face. She looked at Connor, then at Simone holding the forensic reports, and finally at me, standing silently in my oversized trench coat. For the first time in her life, Beatrice realized she could not bully or manipulate her way out of the corner she had painted herself into. Before she could formulate a response, the heavy brass doors of the courthouse swung open. A uniformed bailiff stepped out onto the landing, his voice booming over the chatter of the press. "Docket number 409 Blackwell versus Preston. Judge Harrington is ready. All parties proceed to courtroom 3B immediately." The crowd of reporters fell silent as Vance quickly gathered his legal team, desperately trying to salvage their professional composure. Beatrice adjusted her Chanel jacket, forcing her posture back into a stiff, arrogant line. She walked toward the heavy oak doors, motioning for her lawyers to lead the way. As she passed me in the narrow threshold of the courthouse security checkpoint, Beatrice leaned in close. The smell of her expensive perfume was overpowering. "You think my son turning on me changes anything?" Beatrice whispered, her voice dripping with absolute, unwavering malice. "The judge is mine. The mediator is mine. You do not stand a chance." I looked straight ahead, feeling the stiff, starched collar of my United States Army dress blues pressing against my neck beneath the heavy fabric of the trench coat. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. "Roger that," I replied. Arthur Vance stood buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, dramatic flair. He walked out from behind his table, placing himself directly in the center of the room to command the judge's full attention. "Your Honor," Vance began, his tone dripping with manufactured sorrow, "we are before you today because a tragedy is unfolding in real time. My client Beatrice Blackwell is a pillar of this community. She has spent her life building a stable, loving, and profoundly secure environment. She recently lost her beloved son Liam, and now she watches in sheer terror as her only granddaughter is subjected to the erratic, dangerous, and mentally unstable behavior of her mother." Vance turned slightly, gesturing toward me with a look of profound pity. "Tara Preston is an unemployed widow with zero financial prospects. Since her husband's tragic passing, she has suffered a complete psychological collapse. She is prone to violent delusions. Just last night, local law enforcement was called to her residence because she believed she was under attack by armed mercenaries. It is a textbook case of severe paranoia brought on by financial ruin and grief." Beatrice dabbed her eyes with her silk handkerchief, perfectly on cue, letting out a soft, stage sniffle. "Your Honor, look at her!" Vance continued, raising his hand toward me. She arrives at a federal custody hearing wearing a stained, oversized trench coat, completely disheveled and detached from reality. She has no job, she has no income, she has no ability to provide for this child's basic needs, let alone a safe, nurturing environment. We are asking the court to grant immediate primary custody to Beatrice Blackwell before Tara's delusions escalate into a situation that puts young Lily in physical danger. It is the only moral and logical choice. Vance returned to his table looking immensely pleased with himself. Beatrice patted his arm approvingly. Judge Mitchell frowned, making a note on his legal pad. He looked across the aisle at me, his expression guarded but heavily skeptical. He saw exactly what Vance had painted for him, a quiet, seemingly destitute woman, wrapped in a cheap coat attempting to represent herself against the most expensive legal team in the state. Ms. Preston, Judge Mitchell said, his tone softening slightly with pity. You are appearing pro se today. Do you have a response to these allegations regarding your employment status and mental fitness? I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely controlled. I turned to Lily, giving her a reassuring smile before facing the bench. I do, Your Honor, I replied, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the silent courtroom. But first, I need to correct a factual error in opposing counsel's opening statement regarding my employment. I reached up to the top button of the beige trench coat. I unfastened it. Then the next, and the next. The courtroom was dead silent, the only sound the soft friction of the fabric as I undid the coat. Vance let out an exasperated sigh, leaning back in his chair, clearly preparing to object to whatever bizarre stunt he assumed the crazy widow was pulling. Beatrice rolled her eyes, shaking her head in disgust. I grasped the lapels of the trench coat and shrugged it off my shoulders. I let the heavy beige fabric fall backward, draping it casually over the back of my chair. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective audible gasp swept through the gallery. Vance's smug sigh choked off in his throat, his jaw dropping open as he shot up straight in his chair. Beatrice's eyes widened to the size of saucers, the color draining so rapidly from her face that her expensive foundation looked like a death mask. Behind me, I heard Connor let out a sharp breath while Simone simply chuckled. I stood at attention, perfectly framed by the harsh fluorescent lights above. The dark blue fabric of my United States Army dress blues was immaculate, tailored with razor-sharp precision. The heavy silver eagles pinned to my epaulets gleamed brilliantly, catching the light with every microscopic movement. My left breast was a solid wall of color, displaying rows of combat ribbons, the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Joint Service Commendation. And mounted proudly above the ribbons was my Master Cyber Warfare badge. I was not an unemployed delusional widow. I was a high-ranking, highly decorated military officer, and the absolute authority I projected filled every square inch of the room. Judge Mitchell froze. His pen hovered inches above his legal pad. He stared at me, his eyes tracking rapidly from the silver eagles on my shoulders down to the combat ribbons and finally locking onto the cyber warfare insignia. The skepticism vanished from his face, replaced by a profound electric shock of recognition. Judge Mitchell had served. He knew exactly what those ribbons meant. He knew the grueling, classified, and highly lethal career path required to wear that specific combination of hardware. He knew he was not looking at a suburban mother in distress. He was looking at a federal weapon. Judge Mitchell set his pen down. He sat up completely straight, squaring his shoulders in an unconscious display of military deference. The stern, dismissive tone he had used only moments before evaporated completely. "Good morning, Colonel." The silence in the courtroom following Judge Mitchell's greeting was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic impact. Beatrice Blackwell, the supposedly untouchable matriarch who had spent the last 30 minutes performing for the press, went deathly pale. The expensive, sun-kissed bronzer on her face suddenly looked like a layer of dry dust over a ghost. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She stared at the silver eagles resting on my shoulders, her eyes darting frantically to the rows of combat ribbons on my chest. "You are a colonel?" She finally stammered, her voice a hollow, reedy croak that barely carried past her own table. Beside her, Arthur Vance looked as if the floor had just dropped out from under him. The polished predatory arrogance he had wielded on the courthouse steps evaporated into thin air. He frantically began shuffling through his perfectly organized binders, tearing at the pages with shaking hands. His entire legal strategy, the very foundation of his emergency injunction, rested entirely on portraying me as a destitute, unemployed, and mentally unstable civilian. He had prepared hours of speeches about my lack of income, my supposed inability to hold down a job, and my reliance on the Blackwell family wealth. Now he was standing in a federal courtroom facing a high-ranking officer of the United States Army Cyber Command. He looked down at his useless notes, then up at me, the color draining from his face as he realized he had proudly marched his firm into a meticulously laid trap. The reality of the situation was too massive for Beatrice's narcissistic mind to process. Her empire was built on the fundamental belief that everyone else was beneath her. She simply could not accept that the quiet woman she had bullied, belittled, and dismissed for a decade was a federal weapon. Beatrice shot up from her chair, her manicured hands slamming flat against the mahogany table. She rented that Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling accusatory finger directly at my chest. "It is a costume. Do you not see what she is doing? She is an unemployed warehouse worker. She rented a Halloween costume to manipulate the court and play on your sympathies. Your Honor, have her arrested for impersonating an officer." The crack of Judge Mitchell's wooden gavel echoed like a gunshot, silencing Beatrice instantly. His face was thunderous. The strict, merciless demeanor he was famous for shifted into a terrifying, rigid fury. He leaned over the bench, his eyes boring into Beatrice with absolute disgust. "Sit down, Mrs. Blackwell," Judge Mitchell ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. "You will not raise your voice in my courtroom, and you will certainly not hurl baseless accusations at a superior officer." Judge Mitchell sat back, his gaze shifting to Vance, who was actively trying to shrink into the upholstery of his leather chair. "Mr. Vance," the judge continued, his tone laced with glacial ice. "I served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. I know exactly what I'm looking at. I recognize the specific strict regulation placement of those combat ribbons. I recognize the Joint Service Commendation, and I recognize the Master Cyber Warfare Badge, an insignia that is not handed out to anyone outside of the most highly classified echelons of the Department of Defense. But for the sake of the official record, we will put your client's ridiculous outburst to rest immediately." Judge Mitchell extended his hand toward the bailiff. "Colonel Preston, your military identification, please." I stepped forward smoothly. I retrieved my Department of Defense Common Access card from my inner jacket pocket and handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to the bench. Judge Mitchell inspected the heavily encrypted smart card. He swiped it through the federal terminal embedded in his desk. A sharp electronic chime confirmed the cryptographic handshake, verifying my identity directly with the Pentagon's servers. The judge looked at his monitor, then back down at Vance. "The credentials are verified, active, and carry a security clearance level that I am not even authorized to view in its entirety," Judge Mitchell stated, tossing the card back to the bailiff to return to me. "Your entire petition, Mr. Vance, is predicated on the assertion that this woman is unemployed, destitute, and incapable of providing a secure environment for her child. You have brought a frivolous, thoroughly unresearched case into my courtroom based entirely on the malicious lies of a disgruntled grandmother." Vance opened his mouth to salvage his ruined career, but no words came out. He looked at Beatrice with profound resentment, realizing she had fed him a fatal lie that would likely result in his disbarment. Beatrice was hyperventilating, clutching her pearl necklace as the walls of her untouchable reality finally closed in to crush her. In the gallery behind me, Simone leaned forward, a fierce, satisfied smile playing across her lips. Connor sat beside her, perfectly still, watching the woman who had terrorized him, his entire life, completely unravel. Beside me, at the petitioner's table, Lily continued to quietly color in her book with a bright blue crayon, completely insulated from the destruction of her grandmother's empire. The power dynamic in the room had irreversibly inverted. I did not sit back down. I remained standing. I picked up the heavy, reinforced tactical briefcase I had carried past the press pool. I placed it squarely on the polished wood of my table and snapped the heavy brass locks open. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet room. I looked at Beatrice, watching the sheer terror dilating her pupils as I pulled Simone's forensic reports and Connor's master red ledger from the padded compartments. Then I turned my attention back to the bench. "Your Honor!" I said, my voice ringing with the cold, absolute authority of a commanding officer seizing control of the battlefield. "I am not here just to defend my custody rights. I am here to present evidence of severe financial fraud, perjury, and child endangerment." Vance slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, as a guttural sob tore from his throat. Judge Mitchell then turned his full, terrifying attention to Beatrice. She shrank back into her chair, her manicured hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles were stark white. The metal binding her wrists was cold, heavy, and completely unforgiving. The two officers did not care about her bruised ego or her ruined Chanel suit. They gripped her under her arms, hauling her forward as her knees buckled. She was dead weight, sobbing hysterically, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. "Take your hands off me," she wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, reedy squeak. "I am Beatrice Blackwell. You cannot do this to me." The officers ignored her, marching her straight down the center aisle. She dragged her feet, her designer heels scuffing against the polished marble. As she was hauled past the gallery, the press pool erupted. The reporters surged against the wooden divider, shouting questions that overlapped into a deafening roar. "Mrs. Blackwell, did you murder your son Beatrice? Where are the offshore accounts? Are you facing life in prison?" She squeezed her eyes shut, thrashing her head from side to side as the officers shoved through the heavy oak doors. The moment the doors breached, the chaos of the outer hallway swallowed her. The blinding, relentless strobe of camera flashes lit up the corridor. The local and national press had caught wind of the spectacle, and they were merciless. They captured every single humiliating detail of the untouchable society queen being dragged away in steel cuffs, her face twisted in an ugly, weeping grimace. Her legacy was not just broken, it was entirely incinerated on live television. Back inside the courtroom, the suffocating tension finally broke. Arthur Vance remained slouched at the respondent's table, staring at the floor, waiting for his own inevitable arrest. Dr. Thorne was already being escorted out a side door by a federal marshal, his head hung low in absolute defeat. I turned my attention back to the bench. Judge Warren Mitchell was watching the doors close behind Beatrice, his expression radiating a profound, righteous satisfaction. He slowly removed his glasses, placing them on his desk, and looked down at me. I walked forward, stopping just short of the bench. I stood at attention, shoulders squared. "Colonel Preston," Judge Mitchell said, his voice dropping the harsh judicial edge he had carried all morning. "It has been a very long time since I have seen a tactical operation executed with such absolute precision in my courtroom. You did not just defend your family today, you eliminated a severe threat to this community." He stood up from his heavy leather chair and leaned over the elevated wooden barrier, extending his hand. "It is an honor to meet you, Colonel," he stated with deep sincerity. "And I am deeply sorry for the loss of your husband. He clearly married a remarkable woman." I reached up and gripped his hand firmly. "Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you for ensuring justice was swift." "Dismissed, Colonel," he replied, offering a brief, respectful nod. "Go take your daughter home." I turned away from the bench and walked back to the petitioner's table. Lily was still sitting there, happily coloring a bright green dragon, completely insulated from the destruction that had just occurred. I closed my tactical briefcase, snapping the heavy brass locks shut, and hoisted it by the handle. Simone and Connor were waiting for me at the swinging wooden gate. Connor looked physically lighter. The dark, exhausted circles under his eyes seemed to have vanished, replaced by a profound sense of relief. The suffocating shadow his mother had cast over his entire life had finally lifted. We pushed through the heavy doors and navigated the remaining press in the hallway, flanked by 2 court officers who ensured we had a clear path. We stepped out of the courthouse and into the blinding, beautiful sunlight of the late afternoon. The air smelled fresh, entirely free of the stale, oppressive scent of the courtroom. Connor turned to me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders in a fierce, crushing hug. "Thank you, Tara," Connor said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave him justice. You gave Liam the justice he deserved, and you gave me my life back. I am leaving the city tomorrow. I am starting over far away from the Blackwell name. I am finally free. You earned your freedom, Connor, I replied, hugging him back. You risked everything to get that ledger. Liam would be incredibly proud of the man you became today. Connor wiped his eyes, offering a bright, genuine smile before stepping back. Simone stepped forward next. She adjusted her sharp charcoal blazer, a triumphant, brilliant grin lighting up her face. She pulled me into a tight embrace. We did it? Simone laughed, pulling back and resting her hands on her hips. We actually took down the queen on her own chessboard. We did, I agreed, smiling back. What is your next move, Simone? The Treasury Department is going to be begging to have you back after this. Makes the national news. Simone shook her head, her eyes flashing with fierce ambition. I am done working for other agencies. Today proved exactly what I am capable of. I am taking the capital I have saved and I am opening my own independent forensic accounting firm. I am going to build my own empire, Tara. The right way. I have no doubt you will run the financial world in less than a year, I said, shaking her hand firmly. Send me your new business card. I know a few federal agencies that will need your specialized services. Simone beamed, giving me one last victorious nod. I turned back to Lily. I crouched down, wrapping my arms around her small waist, and lifted her up onto my hip. She giggled, wrapping her arms securely around my neck and resting her chin on my shoulder. I picked up my heavy briefcase with my free hand. We walked together down the wide, grand stone steps of the federal courthouse. The bright sunlight washed over us, warming my military uniform. The heavy, suffocating weight of the past year, the grief, the paranoia, the relentless attacks from my in-laws fell away with every step we took. I was no longer a grieving widow fighting for survival. I was exactly who I was trained to be. At the bottom of the steps, a heavy black government SUV glided smoothly to the curb, its tinted windows gleaming in the sun. The vehicle came to a complete halt. The driver's side door opened. A young, sharply dressed soldier in standard army camouflage stepped out. He moved with crisp, flawless discipline. He walked around the front of the vehicle, coming to a halt directly in front of me. He snapped his heels together and threw up a perfect, rigid salute. "Good afternoon, Colonel," the soldier said, his voice ringing with absolute respect. "Your transport is ready." I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I shifted Lily's weight slightly, straightened my spine, and raised my hand, returning the salute with sharp, practiced military precision. "Thank you, Sergeant," I replied. He opened the heavy rear door of the SUV. I climbed inside, settling Lily securely into her car seat before taking my place beside her. The soldier closed the door with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing us inside the quiet, secure cabin. The engine hummed to life. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flowing city traffic. I looked out the tinted window, watching the grand pillars of the courthouse shrink into the distance. I looked at the rear-view mirror, watching the shattered remains of Beatrice Blackwell's toxic, poisonous empire fade away into nothing. I leaned back against the leather seat, holding my daughter's hand. We were safe, we were victorious, and we were finally going home. The profound lesson from Tara's journey is that true strength lies in unwavering boundaries and the refusal to let toxic family members dictate your reality. Beatrice Blackwell's downfall illustrates that wealth, status, and manipulation cannot permanently shield someone from the consequences of their cruelty. Tara faced immense betrayal, yet she chose to protect her daughter, using the absolute truth as her ultimate weapon rather than yielding to intimidation. This reminds us that shared blood never excuses abuse, and justice comes from courageously exposing hidden toxic cycles. Have you ever had to stand your ground against toxic family dynamics? Share your story in the comments below.